This is the Dental Up Podcast, your daily source for insights from dentists and leaders in the industry. Brought to you by Keating Dental Lab, a full-service, award-winning dental lab that is here to add value to your dental practice. With high-quality restorations, friendly, reliable service, the best products and prices, come experience the Keating difference. Visit KeatingDentalLab.com for details.
Welcome back to the Dental Lab Podcast. I'm Bob Brandon, the General Manager here at Keating Dental Lab. So what I'm going to do today is run through the topics Erica and I discussed. It's probably going to be quicker this way because I'll do all the talking. Today's episode should be under 20 minutes and will be real efficient. And then at the end, I'll run through some of the most common questions we receive via email. So let's get to it. We're going to cover the biology of color vision and some physics sprinkled in, how to communicate color and the terminology we use, the timing and sequence of the shade taking step and a couple tricks, and then how to set up your camera and what types of cameras to avoid. Okay, so let's begin with a brief review of physics and biology. What's actually going on when we see something in color? Put simply, it's the light rays bouncing off an object and returning to the color photoreceptor cells in our retina. So visible light occurs in the spectrum of 380 to 700 nanometers. Blue and violet are on the low end, and orange and red are on the higher end of the spectrum. Each different color has a particular wavelength of light, and colors consisting of a single wavelength are called spectral colors or pure colors. Unfortunately, most teeth are something in this entire visible light range or white light, so it's really just a mixture of wavelengths. The cells in our retinas are called photoreceptors, and we have two types, rods and cones. We have approximately 20 times more rods than cones. However, in the fovea, the specific location of our retinas for visual acuity, the cones are most highly concentrated. Women also have more cones than men, which is why I often hear my wife say, "You're wearing that?" Anyway, that's important though, because all you male doctors listening, you might want to have a female assistant who is well trained on shade taking procedures. Okay, so back to dentistry. When we talk about the color of a tooth, we need to break down this into three different parameters: value, hue, and chroma. Value is the grayscale, or the light to dark level. Hue is the color name, red, yellow, brown, etc. And chroma is the intensity or saturation of that particular hue. So what's most important? Well, that's easy. Remember, human eyeballs have 20 times more rods than cones, so our eyes can perceive even the slightest difference in value between objects. And that's why dentists send back a restoration to the lab much more commonly for being too light or too dark. If you focus on the value, you're 90% there. And getting the value right is also dependent on the position and orientation of the shade tab during your photographic step. Now, this is very important. I want you to listen, then go back and replay this later. You must orient the shade tab in the exact same plane as the object you are measuring, because the light reflected back at you will be of a different wavelength if the shade tab and the tooth are in different planes. If you think about it this way, if your shade tab is only 1 millimeter in front of the tooth you want to match, that's equivalent to 1 million nanometers. Again, 1 millimeter, 1 million nanometers. So it's amazing that we get anything right. Now, the value is also heavily dependent on the timing of your shade taking step. You must record the value of the object you are trying to measure first, before your high-powered lights, your suction, your hand pieces, and dehydration take over. If you record the value after you're done working, it'll be wrong. And a dry or dehydrated tooth will appear lighter in value than a properly hydrated tooth. So let's review. The two most important aspects of recording the correct value are the timing and the orientation of your shade tab. So now, after you've determined value, look at the hue. You want to ask yourself, is the object I want to match more of a yellow range or in the red-brown range? And that's all teeth are. Yellow, red, brown, or mixtures in between. Sure, you have the effects of bleaching, stains, diet, smoking, etc. But intrinsically, teeth are either in the yellow range or red-brown range, or somewhere in between, somewhere in the middle. So after you figured out the hue, then you want to look at the intensity or saturation, which is the level of chroma. So let me run through real quick what Jeanette and I do here in the lab when we see a patient for a custom shade taking appointment. First, we sit the patient upright in the chair at a near 90-degree angle, and we turn off the overhead operatory light. We want to let the ambient room light take over, which comes in through the window, and also our color-corrected room lights. Now, these color-corrected bulbs are about $25 each, and you can buy them at Lowe's in T8 or T12 ballast connections. They're well worth the money because fluorescent lights will distort your readings by putting you in the yellow range. LED lights are lower wavelength, which is why they sometimes appear blue. The closest bulb to natural light is actually halogen, but it's difficult to find those anywhere these days. The most important thing to remember is turn everything off that will give you a distorted reading, especially if you want to be accurate, and who doesn't? So we sit the patient up and we take a test photo. I use a Canon EOS 6D with a 100mm macro lens and a macro ring light. This entire setup was under $2,000, and we've used it nearly every single day for 8 years, so it's worth the investment. I only use manual focus and shoot at an f-stop at 32. The ISO reading is always around 200, and the shutter speed is about 1/200th of a second. But these parameters are going to depend on the lighting in your office. So the first image we take is just to test the lighting. And if it's too bright, I adjust the flash power setting 1 level down. And if it's too dark, then I bump it up 1 level. Simple. Once we have the lighting correct, I set the camera to black and white mode, and we're going to determine the value. We use the Vita 3D Master M shade tabs for this step because this gives us value levels 0 through 5. Jeanette holds the shade tab in the exact same plane as the tooth we are measuring, and I position the lens of the camera at a direct right angle to the object. This way, the light rays generated from the flash strike the object and shade tab at exactly the same instant. It takes us 2 or 3 attempts to determine the exact value. And if we can't get it perfect, we then switch over to the Vita Bleach guide, which has intermediate value levels. Their value levels 0.5, 1.5, 2.5, etc. So after you've determined the value, what's next? Well, remember from before, we go to hue, and we ask ourselves, is the object more yellow or red-brown? If it's yellow, then we look at the L tabs. And if it's red-brown, then we choose the R tabs. So let's say you selected value level 3, and you think the object is more red-brown. You then pull out the 3R tabs, and now you're left with only to choose the chroma. There's 2 tabs to choose from, a lower saturation 3R 1.5 and a higher saturation, which is 3R 2.5. That's it, you're done. Well, maybe not so much. What if it isn't a perfect match? Well, then you turn to the M tabs because the M tabs are really a mixed or medium hue. The M tabs have 3 different levels of chroma, but if you approach the problem the same way, you'll find the appropriate saturation level. It's really important now that you only look intently at a shade tab for 3 to 5 seconds. Cone cells fatigue easily because they are so few in number. You need to give your eyes a chance to recalibrate, and we do that by choosing a neutral gray or pale blue object that's in the background. And we do this every time between shade tab selections. After we've chosen the correct tab and have a great photographic image, we then turn our focus to translucency in the incisal third of the tooth. And this is what really makes the restoration. So you need to be able to communicate this. We use a matte black background and position it directly behind the tooth we are measuring. Then I turn the flash power down, usually 1 or 2 settings, and I position the lens closer to the patient. And finally, I crank up the magnification. I want to look through the enamel layer, but not have the light be so overpowering that you get an overexposed image. And at this step, we're basically looking for translucency, surface texture, and facial anatomy. Now, translucency is difficult to measure. There's really no objective standard here. It's definitely a subjective reading. And we break down translucency into 2 different steps. And the first is volume of translucency. And we communicate this with a light, medium, or heavy volume of translucency. And then we're going to look at the intensity of the translucency. And again, we use terms light, medium, and heavy. So after we've really described the translucency, we move on to the facial anatomy and determine if there is lobing present. So most middle-aged or older patients, there's none, but you should still communicate not only the age of the patient, but if your patient has a light level of lobing, medium, or heavy. And then finally, you want to look at surface texture and then communicate the degree of polish or finish on the surface. We use terms such as smooth surface texture, medium, or heavy surface texture. Now that's shade taking made simple. Invest in a good camera, invest in a 3D master shade guide, and learn to approach the problem the same way every time using the same sequence and methodology. Once you've mastered this system, you will start seeing consistent results. So let's review and talk about what to avoid. Avoid taking shades with your operatory light on, and avoid taking shades last in your sequence of steps. You must do it first. And if you give your lab a photo with the tooth already prepped, basically we use that for stump or dent and shade only. You also need to avoid using intraoral cameras for shade taking photography. The image quality is often low and the images are pixelated. And for the same reason, you should avoid using poor quality camera phones. But I do like the iPhone 13 images and also the images we receive from Galaxy phone cameras. Those are great. So having a good camera and learning how to use it will improve your dentistry 1,000-fold. I go back and I look at old images and see some things that we missed 5 years ago. And we can get better as technicians and ceramists by viewing our work over time. The same definitely holds true for clinicians. Now, from time to time, when we have a shorter program, I'll reintroduce something we had here at the lab a few years back when our local customers would come in for Wednesday night study clubs. It was called Ask a Technician. And we had a question box at the back of the room where doctors could write down a question for all of us lab techs attending the study club meetings. We would then all take turns and go around the room answering the question in different ways. And it was kind of fun listening to the different opinions on all these topics. So if you have a question that you'd like answered, just email me. It's real simple. It's bob@keatingdentallab.com. And when we have some extra time at the end of the podcast, I'll do my best to answer. So let her rip. So here's some common questions we get. What's the best scanner to buy? Good question, and we get this a lot, but I can't answer this for you 100%. Dean Tassi and I covered this in a podcast probably 8 or 9 episodes ago. And here's my take. First, I'd avoid any lab that just wants to give you a scanner for free, but doesn't know how to make a tooth. That's a recipe for disaster, so don't fall for it. Second, determine exactly what you're going to use the scanner for and which procedures are most important to you and your team. Finally, go with a solid name brand, something that's trusted and standard in the industry. I like 3Shape Trios, Itero, and Serona. You're going to see one of the more popular brands disappear soon. I'm not going to say which one, but if you're going to spend a lot of money, make sure the company behind the product is going to be around for you. Second question is, what's the most aesthetic crown? Again, this is a very good question, and it depends on the circumstance. Overall, I prefer Emax and KDZ Ultra, which is our name brand for Porcelain Fuse Zirconia. Personally, for most posterior single units, monolithic zirconia, our KDZ Bruxer aesthetic is beautiful. This is our 5Y zirconia. It's highly translucent and strong. It's rated at 750 megapascals at 2 millimeters thickness. But again, we just made a single central for a local customer with a root canal treated tooth and adjacent PFM. This tooth also had a gold post in it that the clinician did not want to remove. So we used a PFM. It turned out beautiful. And it was definitely the right decision for this case. Basically, what I'm saying is don't fall into a trap of only prescribing one restoration for all your patients. Judge each situation on its own merit and choose wisely. How can I save on my lab bill? Yeah, this is really important right now. You know, everybody knows inflation's at a 40-year high, and gas prices here in Southern California are generally over $6 a gallon. It's crazy. And for us here at Keating, I mean, we haven't even raised prices in over 10 years. You know, with UPS bills keep going up, prices of our raw materials keep going up, gold and palladium, it's unbelievable, through the roof right now. The world's largest palladium mine, I mean, I just looked this up last week. The world's largest palladium mine is in Russia, and the company name is called Norilsk Nickel. You can look it up yourself. I mean, right now, palladium-based PFM, our semi-precious alloy, is actually pricing out higher than our full cast high noble gold. It's ridiculous, but that's the reality with where we're at right now. And it affects everything and every decision we make here in the lab. So we've taken strategies to help mitigate these high costs to our customers, and I'm going to run down some for you right now. First, there's zirconia. It's a flat rate material, and here at Keating, it comes in 3 options. You've got your high strength KDZ Bruxer, you've got your high translucent KDZ Bruxer aesthetic, and you've got our signature product, KDZ Ultra, which is Noritake CZR porcelain hand layered on a high strength 3Y zirconia core. Second, if you prescribe a PFM, I'd limit it to bridge work right now, and make sure you have proper buildups on your preps. Abutment teeth with a proper buildup that are parallel and not over tapered are going to consume about $200 to $300 less in alloy for a 3-unit bridge. So really just focus on this clinical step. Make sure your preps have proper buildups and we won't have to, charge the high prices for alloy. Finally, porcelain fused and non-precious metal is and always has been a viable option. We've always used it here at Keating. There will always be a place for it. I know some clinicians don't like it, but porcelain fused to non-precious alloy is a viable option now more than ever. Here at Keating, we do take the extra step of gold plating the intaglio surface to make it a nice, rich, deep yellow color, and that improves the physical appearance of it. Okay, so we've got a couple minutes for some personal questions, and these basically comes from friends who are clinicians throughout the country. I've got one here from Fight On in San Diego, and he wants to know how good is USC football going to be next year? Can they win a championship? Well, to be honest with you, I just want to see them compete. I want to see the guys compete every day in practice. Compete every game. Certainly don't get blown out by Stanford or Oregon State again at home. That's a little embarrassing. Utah's always tough. I love their coach and their program. They gave Ohio State a run for their money in the Rose Bowl. I'm not really sure what to make of ASU right now. They've got a lot of coaches getting in trouble, and they just lost their stud QB, so that always hurts your chances. But if you want to be realistic, I think go win the South, go beat Oregon or whoever wins the North. And to me, that will be a successful first year under Lincoln Riley. And recruiting needs to improve on the lines. You need to get some big, fast guys that can block and tackle. I mean, I watched that championship game like most people. Alabama and Georgia, those guys are the real deal on the lines. And, you've got linebackers that can just fly, get to the ball. They're strong enough to get off the block. I mean, that's what SC needs to become again. Right now I'm just excited for a new defensive coordinator because honestly, watching last year's defense was just too painful for me. So now I got a question from a guy that's he's a world football fan. In America, we call that soccer. So he's a world football fan and watching the Champions League last week. And he goes, did you see PSG crash out of the Champions League last week? Who do you think will win it this year? Well, PSG has some flashy players too. I love watching Mbappe, and he's the real deal. Neymar's good, probably a little bit of a head case. And then you throw in the world's most talented and successful player in Lionel Messi, and that's a real formidable opponent. But at the end of the day, they didn't play as a team, and they play in a rather soft league that really doesn't properly prepare you for the rigors of Champions League knockout rounds. And that's why when you run into the kings of Europe, Real Madrid, they play like a champion every time their backs are against the wall. I think it's going to be interesting. You've got some real strong competition. You've got, you got Liverpool, you got Man City, you got Bayern. I think you got Real Madrid. I think it's going to be a great competition now that we're heading into the quarterfinals. It'll be interesting to see who gets healthy and see who can crank it up a notch. But my money's on Bayern or Man City. Okay, so here's a little personal one here. How's the health of the lab? Is everyone vaccinated? Well, thank you. And yes, December and January were rough, and I know it affected a lot of you customers, and we got a lot of calls. And I really thank all you for your concern. The virus hit us hard in December and January, and it did affect things like turnaround time and simple tasks like answering the phone. I thank you all for your patience during those difficult times for us, and now we're in a much better spot. Fortunately, things are looking good. Most employees are vaccinated. We've always left that decision up to each employee. In this country, individual choice is very important. And we adopted that mentality. We just manage the risk individually. Now, here's my personal thought on the situation. I'm vaccinated. My wife, who works in a hospital, is vaccinated. Our kids and our parents are vaccinated. It doesn't mean it's the right decision for everyone. And I respect all your personal decisions on this matter. But for me personally, I always circle back to one of my courses at UC Davis. It was in microbiology, and it was about viruses. And for the life of me, being a naive 20-year-old kid, I couldn't understand why some viruses were so infectious and so powerful, so virulent. They were so good at their job that they wound up killing the organism they had infected. And it just seemed counterintuitive to me at the time. You had a virus that can really only infect and reproduce itself, but it's so good at its job that it winds up killing the host. And I honestly, I just couldn't grasp why that was occurring. So I asked my professor, Dr. Eric Mann at UC Davis, this question. I hope he's still teaching because he's great. And his answer really stuck with me, and it resonates now more than ever. And he said, "You're assuming too much. The virus can't think ahead. The virus doesn't have a brain. The virus doesn't know it's killing the host. It doesn't have an ability to think. It's just a tiny piece of RNA wrapped inside a lipid membrane with some proteins stuck on the outside that allow it to enter into your cells and infect." So here we are now, 30 years later, and there's this new virus. It has no eyes. It has no brain. It can't tell if you're red or blue, black, white, or brown. It could care less if you're red, green, or purple. All the virus is looking for is a susceptible host. That's it. And if you're susceptible, you're more prone to infection. So anyway, people, get out there, enjoy St. Patrick's Day. And if you're in the South, head on out to Atlanta and get to the Hinman Dental Meeting. It's honestly one of the best shows in the country. Don't forget to fill out your March Madness brackets. Enjoy your week, and we'll do it all over again next Tuesday.
Thank you for listening to the Dental Up podcast, your daily source for insights from dentists and leaders in the industry. This episode is sponsored by Keating Dental Lab, here to add value to your dental practice. With high-quality restorations, friendly, reliable service, the best products and prices, come experience the Keating difference. Visit KeatingDentalLab.com for details.